Who has a question?
Earl, earlier you had talked about these titanium silos between the different organizations within your organization. Yesterday we heard several presentations talking about this urban air mobility. Where are you institutionally in trying to create something like a UAS office to reflect on integrating the requirements into perhaps a new urban air mobility transportation infrastructure beyond just aircraft search?
Sure. No, good questions. There's a couple of major groups within the FAA. There's what we call the safety organization, which is where Flight Standards Aircraft Cert, the UAS office, is located. We have airports and then air traffic. And there's other offices, but for the purpose of this discussion, let's focus on those three. Within AVS is the UAS office. Its mission in the UAS office and its charter is to work across the entire agency, okay? We have been using the UAS office to coordinate our urban air mobility discussions to assure, because they're used to working across all the lines of business. And we will continue to do so within the AVS organization. The administrator is also, the acting administrator has also expressed a desire to actually create a new organization and focused on innovation and getting projects started. What they've done is they looked at what's happened with the UAS office over the last few years, and they've understood that you almost need an advocate within the agency that knows all the parts of the agency and how to bring people together to advance some of these technologies into the field. As I said, it's not the technology that's the problem, it's getting the discussions working across all the lines of business so we understand how we're managing those particular risks. So those are the two areas we're looking at it. But I will just say, don't wait for that. That's our internal stuff. Happy to talk about it. But the main thing for you guys and your projects is, come to us now, and it's my job to make sure that it gets coordinated within the entire agency. And I think we do get a lot of help too from the Gamma is another, and there are subcommittees. I forget all the name of the subcommittees that you're chairing, but that's been a really big help of pulling the industry together and pulling the FAA together, because we have joint meetings, and these gentlemen have been in those meetings when we come in. It is the head of each one of those organizations within the FAA that's sitting down and discussing how we could move forward with these various issues. Does that answer your question?
All right, Rex, next question.
I'm going to pile on that one. So back in 2004, the FAA actually did something to actually get rid of that SI and the silo effect in the FAA. Now I work with a lot of great people in the FAA, but you're right. They are titanium silos. One of the issues that I run into in that area is certain people in certain departments aren't really allowed to go talk to the other guy across the hall. They have to get permission from their boss. And that creates an issue internally. But in 2004, the FAA did a wonderful thing. They stood up through an order the Intra-FAA Vertical Flight Committee, which fell out of service, was mainly because of the helicopter and the tilt rotor. But it's no longer there. But now with this helicopter, tilt rotor, UAS, drone, eVTOL, UAM, a recommendation would be to reestablish that so that all those intra lines of business talk to each other on a regular basis.
Yeah, so let me begin at the beginning. There are no prohibitions from offices talking to each other. It's a cultural issue. I will admit fully it happens, and managers say don't go talk to such and such or whatever. I'm not denying that, but that is not the way it's supposed to happen. And as we know, we're supposed to talk across our organization and manage things. The particular committee you're talking about, let me just say, that type of committee works best when you have a product to focus around. And that's another thing. And you guys don't know all the details of probably what he's talking about. But there's different groups you put together. When you're talking conceptually from a policy standpoint, I think the groups that we have and how we've been pulling together works the best. But you're never going to break through until somebody is going to have to be first. And it'll be more expensive and harder for you than anybody else. But having a real piece of hardware and a real project presented to you forces us to bring those teams together. And that was one of the things that was happening with the tilt rotor and with that, because we had to write a tilt rotor certificate. We had to get all those rules together. So having something real really pulls everything together. Otherwise, we talk about it, we wait, and so somebody has to step up. Everybody's been waiting. Well, when are you going to come out with X or Y or Z? It's going to happen when somebody is on our doorstep with the certificate application saying, you must deal with me now because I've officially applied and you have to answer me. And that is the way it works. You want to, I think you could probably add some comments on, the panel could add some comments on that. No? You don't want to? Okay.
Okay, to continue with the conversation, I'm sorry I won't let you off the hook yet. So in the case where we do want to talk to Mr. White, do we have to open a special project if we want to have confidentiality?
This is prior to opening up any official project.
Okay, so this is still, at a philosophy.
Correct. Absolutely. And just so you know, any proprietary information, I mean, as we are restricted. I mean, we can't be sharing that. We're under all the same laws and restrictions when it comes to the proprietary information.
Maybe I'll add a little color to that. So the new Office of Innovation that Peter White is kind of staffing, essentially what you're doing is you're talking to the standard staff directly. So in the past, the way it would go is you would put in a formal application and an ACO. The ACO would then say, there's a bunch of stuff here we don't know what to do with. They would go talk to the standard staff, come back to you and say, here's what you have to do. And you'd say, well, I don't like that. It doesn't quite fit. And they go, well, hang on. And they go back again. So now you can go work with Peter White and the standard staff. They'll tell you, actually, no, we've dealt with that before. There's already policy, or this is how we're dealing with that special condition. And then we need to build something new for you. You can get all that done prior to application. Yep.
We're trying to break through. No, we're trying to break through that kind of that artificial firewall and have those direct discussions. But on the other hand, also realize, and this is what we have, being first, we have folks that have had those discussions with the Innovation Office and the Standards Office and thought they were done, and not realize you now have to go deal with a Aircraft Certification Office who hasn't necessarily been in those discussions. Now we're bringing them in on purpose. We're switching the teams around. That was one of the things we started looking at. I'm like, okay, you can't just have the standards guys go off on their own. So it's a wider communication that's necessary. So yes, it's a great opportunity. I don't want to belittle it all, but don't think just because you had a discussion with the standards folks, we have everybody on board and we're ready to move forward with your certification project. There's a lot of people to bring along when you're doing a certification project. And as was mentioned, it's not just aircraft certification.
Okay, question 2, you can take it away from me when you want, but are you going to roll up the things you're doing for 4754 and 61 into a revision of 1309, or do you see 1309 just pointing back to the ARPs?
For me?
I mean, since we got SAE working on rewrites or revisions, is that going to roll back over to 1309, and is it going to cause a change at 1309?
So, and I'm pulling from my memory now, the way, and I got to look at it, 1309 doesn't specifically call out an SAE standard or any standard. So we use it as a means of compliance, okay? So that does not restrict us. It could be an XYZ standard from your company. Now, remember what I said earlier, we can't prevent, as a US government agency, at least the way the rule is right now, we can't say you can only go to SAE, or you can only go to ASTM, or you can only go, we can't prevent you from doing a company standard or whatever, but the more cooperation there is, the easier it is to adopt those particular standards. I mean, we ended up with SAE, and so when there's revisions, we'll evaluate them and we'll find them either acceptable or not. And in fact, on your CERT project, you could say, maybe you guys don't want to do this, but we have others that they want to use the old version. We're good with that if it was good enough for that particular project. So their CERT basis may say the SAE standard version 1983 or something like, if it's acceptable for that project, it's acceptable for that project. So CERT bases are not, I know we have folks that like to make it all nice and clear. Well, it really isn't. It's a negotiation every time you bring in a TC, and what are you using, and we go through every line, and it's all negotiated basically. And it's negotiated in between engineers, so I like to keep it technical. I mean, but there's still, from a legal standpoint, lots of options, and so don't think we're going to necessarily say, oh, that's the one and only one. You may have a reason to say, well, I'm adopting the standard, but I want to do these three things differently, and we'll evaluate that on the standard staff. That's the Peter White folks, and if we find that acceptable, you can do that on your project.
Could you talk a little bit to Part 33 and the approach that's going to be used for, the whole evaluation, and where the propulsion system ends and where the airframe or the fuel system begins? Because that's really not clear right.
Okay, so it's not clear because you can go either way. And it has been there. Now, I know my engineers argue about it, but I'll tell you, since it ends up, I'm the signator, you can go either way. So Part 23, we actually have in our regs, you can certify an aircraft without a TC'd engine. That is not a new thing. You certify it as an entire package. And I think that actually makes more sense. But I have companies driving that are fighting that tooth and nail. When I say companies, the engine companies, they want to hold up their TC, okay? And to me, that, now, regulatory hat, I don't care about them holding up their TC. That's great if they want to. What I care about is meeting the safety requirements. So if you come in with a CERT basis and you include it all in one package, as long as you're meeting all the safety requirements, you're in compliance, compliance and safe. That's what I'm looking at. But if you want to work with another company and they want to bring in a TC motor and you want to put it on there, well, the problems are still there. Now I have interface problems. And so now I have to work out all those interface problems, and somebody has to be responsible for those interface problems. And we get into big, long agreements in between the engine TC and the airframe TC of who's going to do what, just to get through certification. And it's unique, and it's a problem. So from the regulator standpoint, I love one big package. It's not required though. You get these wishy-washy answers because it is ultimately up to you coming in with that application and saying, this is the way I want to do it, and you're forcing us to answer the question on your project, okay? But industry also drives things. Why do people pick a standardized SAE standard for years and years and years? Because they know we've already accepted it. If I do it this way, I don't have to have that argument with FAA. I'm done. I don't need an exemption. I don't need a special means of compliance. I just do it, and I got a team of people who have done it that way over and over again. Great. So every time you pick another thing that's not done the way it was always done before, now, you don't necessarily have a team that's experienced with it. You have to now, educate our engineers on your new approach, and that just adds time to your project. So all of these, I like to make sure you understand what it is, but all of these are really are your decisions. We can go either way, but it's,
It hugely impacts cost and time.
You got that? That's why a lot of people pick the standardized standards. Hey, if I do it this way, everybody knows how to do with it, and I move on. May not be the way you really want to do it. It's all compromise, right? Engineering's a vehicle is all about compromise. You're going to answer.
Yep. I'll just add a little bit to it. So I also chair ASTM F44. There is a pretty good standard now for integrating hybrid and electric power plants into Part 23 vehicles through ASTM. The means of compliance are tied through a notice of availability from the FAA, so that's formally recognized at this point. And it lets you go either way. It does have some definition around the EPU, thanks to our friend Tom here, who wrote that standard through F39. Is that where you wrote that? Yeah. And so there are some boundaries for lexicon anyway, and then how you want to deal with that stuff is flexible, as Earl is describing.
Hi, Earl. My name's Mike Walls. I work for the FAA Research. I was trying to come to your rescue on some of this because we work on Peter White's innovation team as well. A lot of these guys are talking about, you talked about titanium silos. We've got Part 25, Part 23, all different basic disciplines working on these types of certifications as we speak right now. Actually, Joby, we were engaged with you guys over 2 years ago. So anybody that's afraid to come to the FAA, I just say, send me an email, come to the tech center first, we'll put in an IDA, and we'll talk about what we can do, because from that we can go to other places. The FAA has been more engaged in this particular field than anything else I've ever seen them do across field. So there should be, and this is why I get frustrated, you guys saw me frustrated when you talked certification yesterday. To Earl's point, if you don't apply, the FAA doesn't have to do anything. But we do. You guys come see us, we have things. We're on actually a lot of the SAE committees as well. My complaint about the SAE committees is all of them, there's too many committees and not enough people. And they don't go any faster than the FAA really, because it takes us 5 years plus to get a document through those. So everything he's saying is absolutely true. I can verify it. Jolie and I both work that every day. So if you have questions, you want to talk about something, if we don't know, we'll get you to where you got to go.
Hello. Another question to Earl. Sorry for the others. My name is Gilles Rosenberger from Faraday Aerospace, and I'm one of the European guys in this assembly. Earl, you said that the Part 23 was an example you wanted to follow. And what is wonderful with the Part 23 is that the CS23 is very similar, 95% similar. The problem is the 5% remaining deals with electric propulsion. That's still another problem. But what we see now that FAA and EASA are starting certifying projects with different electric aircraft on different side, with the special condition on the EAS side, with maybe not special conditions like that in FAA. How do you see these two processes merging or converging?
Okay, so first of all, we're talking about government entities, and you don't tell one country how to do, one country doesn't tell another country how they're going to do something. So, but we work cooperatively. And I just like to point that out. Rochelle is my counterpart over at EASA. She's the head of certification. We talk weekly. And not in the details of every project, but making sure that we're assigning people to work things jointly. So we actually have a joint team on electric vehicles, and we have joint team on software. We have these various joint teams, so we try to work as closely as we can. And we have our discussions among ourselves of what the various approaches are. But sometimes there's not going to be full alignment. But what we do to try to do it is have joint teams. If you're open to it and you have a certification project, joint certifications is something that we're committed to. We're trying to do the certifications jointly. But even on a typical aircraft certification project, when we get into the issue papers, as you said, you'll see some differences. We try to minimize the differences as much as we can, but again, that's a continuous dialogue. I would say the biggest issue we have right now worldwide is our approach to what we call the safety continuum. What I was talking about earlier, that we are willing in the United States to have a lower level of oversight, regulatory oversight, if the risk exposure to the public is smaller. And as the risk exposure increases, our level of oversight increases. That is not something that is adopted by much of the world. And I'll give you examples, and you can kind of understand it and I'm going to go to unmanned small UASs. I'm talking really small, like DJI small. Singapore looks at it and says, it's the highest risk because we are a densely populated little teeny city country, and every operation in here, between the security and the safety issues, anything that falls down, we're going to be at the highest level of safety. And you can kind of understand where they're coming from for their country, okay? Because they're not looking at operations in the middle of Nebraska over a cornfield, I mean, they're like, oh no, this is what I need for my country, and this is the oversight I want. I'll do a special condition for other things. So, those approaches I changed. I think that's the biggest difference. The engineering is the same, and we all adopt to the most we can. All these industry consensus standards are a big help. So, I mean, I think effort on those standards advances you worldwide. I don't know if I'm answering totally your question, but we're going to have differences. I don't get excited about the differences. In my position for representing the U.S. government, what we're looking for is acceptance of our products. When the FAA does certification and puts an FAA type certificate, I'm looking for acceptance of that worldwide. And that's where we drive our. We can have different systems, and just so you know, from EASA, I accept Part 23 airplanes coming in. I don't need to review that. Now, that's a hard concept even for my folks, but that's what we drive to. It says if it's in the EASA system and it's fully certified, it's a different system. There was different approaches. I accept it. The level of safety is acceptable, and I expect the same thing the other way around. So we can do things differently, but the product should flow freely, and that's what we concentrate on from a regulator standpoint.
Yeah. I have a question following up on this, which is like, are you then already talking about a kind of validation because we see that the thing is working very quick with the EUAM, because it's much quicker. If you look at the business plans of a lot of the EUAM companies, we're going to be in service in 21, and there is not even one aircraft has been certified, so it will go slower. But if then once I have an eVTOL certified in Europe under their conditions, which is not Part 23, not Part 27, it will be SC VTOL, are you then talking already about how a validation could be done now? Or
yes, and have been for years. And we already have, and quite frankly, we already have our agreements. So we already have our bilateral agreements in place. Now what changes is our implementation procedures. And so those are the kind of things we've negotiated. And again, if you want to see, people are like, well, I want to know what that says. Well, guess what? The first one who does it is the one who gets to find out what it says, because again, we need a real life project to finish dotting the I's and crossing the T's. Conceptually, it's in the agreement. We got it. We've already agreed that we will let products move back and forth, and this is how we deal with it. Now we need a real life project to define the specifics. And in fact, that's the way all implementation procedures work. You have to, and they have to be redone occasionally. When I say redone, countries change. Look what's happening with the UK. They're looking at standing back up an aviation authority if they happen to have a hard Brexit. Okay. Well, they have to now recreate everything that they used to have. We have agreements in place with the UK. They never went away. But when's the last time they've certified an aircraft? When's the last time, so we got to go in and say, okay, do you have the people to do the things that are in our agreement? Are they up to date? Well, actually, most of those people who did that are all working at EASA. So, so those are the kind of things we have to work.
So question on this to Greg, because you have an aircraft already, your company, since several years. And so you're working with EASA, you're working with FAA. So what are you experiencing there? The things you do on one side, you see already they be accepted on the other side as well? Or do you think you have to do several things several times?
So we're not currently in an active validation, so we're going through an FAA certification, but we're not in an active validation right now. I will say from my observation of the broader industry, what we're seeing is some of the European applicants that are working on VTOL aircraft are doing validations into the FAA system, and the FAA is using bilateral procedures. So what that means is basically where the rules are the same, if they're pulling a Part 23 standard for something and they're using a means of compliance the FAA accepts, it seems that there's very little oversight in that area. And then there's other areas like brand new special conditions that have never been done before, an area that the FAA doesn't experience with, or EASA, the FAA spends more time in that area. So it's very traditional to a normal validation from my perspective.
And just last question to Earl, as we see there is so much work to do, is there also additional funding by the government given to all these activities? Because I think if we hear all these things which has to be new, if I see all the committees which are and standards which are going to set up where somebody from FAA is sitting in there, do you have a special budget for UAV?
No.
Okay, so can this be the bottleneck, and can this?
No. It doesn't really work that way. And I suspect you're going to talk about our research budget. You know, I mean, we get different funding for different reasons. It's really pretty simple for us, and I don't get into why Congress makes its decisions or why the administration pulls in. I manage what we are given, okay? And first and foremost is always the existing fleet, okay? That is what we call continued airworthiness. You know, so that is the number one thing that we have to deal with, and that's our major focus. After that, we can talk about actual applications and things that we have, and we'll work on that. And then policy kind of comes out at the bottom of that, but you need policy to support everything, and I have a fixed number of people, but this is where the action is. You know, I do have a fixed number of people. I'm lucky enough to work for the FAA, and compared to EASA and Transport Canada and all these other authorities around the world, I have more people in my standards office than they have in their entire authority. So we have some resources we can manage, and we'll make it work.
Okay, I think Ron's got the mic.
So Mark, I don't want you to feel left out here, and I'll change the topic. So the standards that SAE is making, are they talking to ASTM, or are they overlapping standards? Are they not overlapping intentionally? And what are the SAE standards going to cost an applicant to find what the rules are?
And actually, can I add something to your question? Because I was going to ask a similar question, and that is it, especially within this particular industry, is it possible to also look at the calendaring activities? Because I noticed time and again, ASTM and F44, for instance, end up scheduling their meetings the same week. And we're not a very large group of people, and a lot of us are coming from small companies or small organizations, and trying to intersect both substantively and procedurally would be really helpful. So, sorry, Ron, to add on.
Oh, good question, right? I mean, we get asked this occasionally throughout the years. So the one thing is, yes, we do communicate, and many of the same people on the ASTM committees and the SAE committees, we're pulling from the same experts. And there are some who are more focused on one than the other, and that's true, and likewise for the other side. As far as the calendaring thing goes, that just happened between the AE7D meeting on Monday and the Gamma meetings on Tuesday. And we did talk. This was when we were scheduling them. So that's why we had them lined up, one on Monday, one on Tuesday. Because initially, when we planned them, we were like, okay, so we were going to go for Tuesday. You guys are going to go for Tuesday, and then we were like, well, let's deconflict this. So we moved that around. I'm also on the ASTM F44 Executive Committee, F44.90. So I work with them. I'm on their monthly calls, and also on the attend the face-to-face meetings, also engaged with F-39, F-38, and likewise, we have Greg and we have Tom. They're involved in some SAE activities on the electric aircraft steering group. So we do have that cross-pollination. And you also see, you got to look more specifically at the standards. You just can't take it at its surface and be naive about, oh, there's a committee and they have the same word in their title, because there are some differences. For example, Tom's putting together an EPU document, right? And they're also working on some battery, on a battery standard as well. Or if you look at the AE7D, the energy storage and charging, yeah, there's technologies that are connected. But if you dig deeper into the document, we're working on a charging standard. Now, charging the batteries, yes, it's going to be connected to the batteries, but the scope of the documents are completely separated. They're completely separate. So we don't want to overlap and duplicate effort, because that would just annoy the members that we're pulling from, right? Likewise, so I mean, we have a limited supply of resources. The other thing is when we stand up a committee, we just don't do it and blindly. We use it goes through a process of at least 30 to 40 people. So we develop a scope, a rationale, we do our due diligence, and then we have to get a group of interested parties together. If they say they want to set up a new committee, we will first say, okay, well, let's see, does it fit in the existing standards landscape? Is there already something that's going on? If not, then okay, then we pull that information together, and then that gets validated at the Aerospace Council level, which is a governing body over all of the aerospace standard, SAE aerospace standards technical committees. And that body is made up of 30 representatives from industry from all over. And then they give it their blessing, and they vote on whether or not that should be stood up. So there's processes in place, and we're working as hard as we can to make sure that we could bring the industry forward, because they want standards, and the standards will move as fast as you want them to move. The only thing that we have in place is 28-day ballot cycle. So you could effectively create a standard within 28 days. There's no artificial limit. Now, realistically, you need people to go and participate. We've done it. We've done it, Mike. We've done it in 28 days. You might have missed it in 2001, but we've done it in 28 days. So it'll go as fast as you want it to go. Yeah, yeah.
Hold on, can you use the mic? Thanks, Ron.
You didn't address the elephant in the room of the cost. Now, is it going to cost me $100 or $200 for a document every time I have a different nut or a different connector or a different motor or a different... So now, as an individual, as a flight analyst, DER, as a consultant, or as a company, is it going to cost me $40,000 to find out what Lawrence over here, we may not like the FAA and their regulations, but they're free?
Yeah.
It's all hidden. It's all the fine print.
Well, okay, so I'm an engineer. I'm a technical person. So, if you want to come talk about, purchasing standards, you can talk to some other people at SAE that could better address that topic and maybe work something out for you. We have different models in place. Yes, you can buy them individually, just like you can at ASTM. You can buy them individually. You can also buy have a subscription model. Many organizations have subscriptions, so they have access to all the standards as it is. And you look at the various associations out there. They have different models. Some of them you have to pay tens of thousands of dollars to be a member of that organization, and then okay, you get the standards for free, but you got to foot the bill of like maybe And it also depends on like the size of your organization, your revenues. We don't operate that way. We sell it on basically an individual standard basis. Or you could buy a subscription, and then there are different product lines, different. So I would say you'd probably want to negotiate that with somebody else on staff to talk about pricing or what your needs are. And it depends across the various organizations. I know ASTM sells their standards individually, but then again, there's also the book of standards as well. So there's different models out there, but don't let that prohibit, use the best standard for the job, right? And it depends on the application. It depends. So yeah, I'll pass it over to the mic for some more comments on that. But just communicate. Yeah.
So I think from the top down kind of structure, the way I see this world, right? So the rules that the FAA puts out are the requirements you have to meet. The means of compliance, they exist in guidance. Sometimes the FAA has policies. Sometimes the FAA has like special conditions that have been issued. There are known paths that are acceptable, and that's if you want to go purely through that path with the FAA that exists. The move we made within Part 23 was kind of an intentional shift because the FAA guidance and policy was getting stale and outdated, and we all kind of said, man, the FAA doesn't have the resources to update this stuff fast enough. We all looked as an industry to find a cost-effective, fast way to go. In that case, we kind of chose ASTM. But the point is that having these standards on the street give us an option. So you can choose to use standards that are like, and what does that do for you? It diversifies your risk. So now, instead of me wasting a lot of engineering time and experience to develop my own means of compliance or understand something, a government-provided path that may be outdated and kind of confusing or convoluted, maybe there's this nice clear path that I prefer, I can go use that. I can still use the government path. I can develop my own path and then negotiate with the FAA or other authorities. So I think that there's huge flexibility. I think it's not totally a concern. Look, cost of the work being done. Look, we all put our time into ASTM, we generate those standards and we understand it. We put our time into SAE. I think when we look at what those organizations bring to us when we're sitting in those meetings, it's helpful to have a nice, clean process and a document, and we're kind of paying through the system that way. I look at that from my company perspective, from Joby's perspective. It's time well spent to do that. It develops good means of compliance. The cost of those standards are minuscule compared to the cost of me wasting a day or two not understanding the issue, and more likely it's months, if not years, of debating certain issues. So overall, I think it's a huge time and cost savings for us.
Rich.
Yeah, Rich Lehman. I'm wondering, with the experience on the new Part 23, can the electric aircraft have benefit of lessons learned from conventional certification under the new Part 23? And that causes me to wonder, can you paraphrase a little bit what conventional certification has been like in the Part 23 since it's been adopted, I think, a couple of years ago? Kind of how's that going?
So we have not done a issued a TC using the current cert basis, the latest cert basis, which is in Part 23. There are Textron, Cessna, they have a few projects. They're the ones that I know of that are the lead in that area. And until I will say they have concerns and about that, and actually they point back to the standards committees. They're a little frustrated that, quite frankly, the standards committees are all focused on your stuff and not getting what they need out for conventional aircraft. So I step back and I go, industry, it's all up to you guys. Wherever you send people to, it's you run the committees, you guys decide what your priorities are, and you can still use the original cert bases that have already been accepted, and you don't have to use a new one. We didn't tell everybody you have to go use ASTM. We said you can use everything that has ever been used. You can now use we have a new way to accept these industry consensus standards to make it clearer of, just to reduce the negotiation, so to speak. If you pick these things that have been pre-cleared, you're done. And that is an important part of this, and that is the idea, to make it simpler. But real life catches in, comes in, and I can't control the focus of those industry bodies. Industry does, and he's heard me say it. I've said it in GAMA board meetings. I get complaints about particular standards, and I look at them and I go, "Your engineers wrote the standard. Were you paying attention to it when you sent them to the standards meetings of that, what was going on?" And that's, that, don't come to me and say you don't like the standards. You guys wrote the standards. I found it acceptable. If you want to do another standard, go write another standard and come to me. And if it's, yes, we make the call at the FAA as to whether it's acceptable, but it was written by the engineers from the existing companies, and so I find it kind of ironic how you'll come back and complain to me, and I'm like, you wrote the standard. So this isn't going to change. There's nothing magical. These new rules are just intended to give us more flexibility in accepting the various ways, but all the ways that we have used up till now are still valid.
Another question, guys. Greg had several slides, and I think he articulated well some of the other considerations beyond the Part 23 hardware certification. And yesterday we heard from Uber about upward urban air mobility and some global testing, I think he mentioned in Melbourne, Australia. In order to minimize regional implementations of avionics, of CNS and whatever, is it FAA or other people on the podium, are you thinking in terms of another annex for ICAO, or how are you going to address the flight technical standards and the airports and the noise aspects of this beyond the 14 CFR Part 23?
As soon as you mentioned ICAO, I just went, yeah, we'll be here 50 years from, somebody will be here, not me, 50 years from now, still talking about this and getting international standards set. These things take a long time. The desire is always to, make flow of products as easy as can be. But the reality is, innovative companies come up with their own little thing and they get their certification where they want it, and that drives it, and then it takes years to balance out and change things. I think those are somewhat out of our control. Each, it's sort of VHS versus beta for those of us who are old enough, just the better format, but doesn't necessarily win. It's the open structure and the availability of it worldwide, and so there'll be things like that in this arena. Getting nation states to align is not, is really not what we're good at from an engineering standpoint. I just speak for the FAA, and come on in. We'll get you a certification. We got a great market here in the United States, lots of opportunities. And if we have a good safety record, hopefully other countries will accept that, and we'll do our best with the bilaterals. And there's going to be difference. I don't get hung up on those differences as much as others seem to focus on, because those just take years to play out.
The downside of that, and you can look at the ADSB technology, you have the UAT and the 1090.
Yep.
The U.S. selected the UAT, and then the marketeers say, well, you can't fly into Canada with the UAT, so you need to equip with the 1090.
Yes.
And it impacts your co-channel interference with 1090, because now you're having a larger
I
population.
didn't say it was the best model. I just said it's reality.
Yeah. So this international harmonization from a flight technical standards is important, but we're not there yet. It's immature, and yet this group that you work with needs to start proactively thinking.
Again, I'm going to put out my philosophy in this whole thing. Until you have products flying, it's all just discussion. We got to have product flying. We're not going to find out what's going to be the trend. And just, you mentioned ADSB. It was the big push to get things up in Alaska and flying, and we picked something and it was good. But again, you have to start putting out multiple models out there because people are going to argue about them, and then we'll have to deconflict. We're still deconflicting these, right? Now I could go around the world. We couldn't do that not too long ago. It's the same, we've just been working our way through that. I think this is the model you might want to look at. I mean, there'll be a couple of standards that'll rise as the predominant ones. There'll be 2 or 3, and then people will coalesce the differences. I study regulations. That's kind of what I do, and I haven't seen it work another way. We always try. We put the international committees together. We put all the engineers in one room. We try to do it, but we all have different legal systems and regulatory systems when we're writing all this down and putting it on paper, and things get changed along the way.
All right. I think we probably are ready for a break. I want to thank this panel of presenters. I let the session go long because it's not often that we get a chance to have a conversation like this.